As we begin our program, I wanted to welcome you to The Mystery of the Red Heifer. This DVD will be in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll be stepping out in the deep water and share a peculiar story about 2 cows that were born with the number 7 in their foreheads in 2014 here in the United States. In this segment, we are not making any dogmatic statements, and we think this could be a sign in that God is showing something to America. You could call this a theory if you wish, but over time it will either be true or not be true. But if we didn't share the story, how would anyone know? Later in part 2, we will be discussing what the Bible says about the red heifer, which was God's instructions what to do with this animal and what its purpose was. That story is found in the book of Numbers, chapter 19. Then in part 3, we will show how Jesus' death on the cross fulfilled the Old Testament purpose of the red heifer. We did want you to know this is the most detailed film ever made about the subject of the red heifer. You will get the real story here. For this and much more, stay tuned. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to each and every one. My name's Michael Smith. I'm reporting to you today from Gatesville, Texas. Well, today we came to this area to investigate a very mysterious red heifer cow with the number 7 on its forehead. Thank you so much, Hap and Pam, for having me and the team here. We appreciate that very much. So let me start off with a question for you, Hap. So, Hap and Pam, when did you first hear about this black and white calf with the number 7? In other words, a cow with a number 7 in its forehead. Tell us a little bit about that.
In December, we were out Christmas shopping one night. I don't recall what night it was, but we got home about a little after 11 o'clock, and I turned on the TV, and we switched it over to the Jim Baker show, and immediately saw this black and white heifer with they were commenting on a 7 on its forehead. And the Rabbi Jonathan Kahn was there, and he had given his take on it, and we didn't know any significance at that point about that black and white one, other than they were saying it was nicknaming a Lucky 7 or a Big Ben after the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback, but it was kind of the secular type of a name, and we thought at that time, my exact wording was, well, Pam, we've got one of those. Mm-hmm. We've got a calf with a 7 on its forehead. So anyway, that's when we first saw this. We didn't know anything else about what the rabbi was going to say about it, but we just thought it wasn't a coincidence, or we didn't think it was. So anyway, they brought up about the black and white calf was born on the 20th of September, but is the week of the Jewish New Year, I think, or the beginning of a Shemitah year. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they said if it had been born on the 25th of September, that would be on the Jewish New Year. But it was born the 20th, so I told Pam, I said, I'm just curious, I'm going to go in there and look at my records. And we walked in there, or I did, walked in there and thumbed through them real quick. And I came back in and I told Pam, I said, I can't believe this. That calf's born on the 25th of September. That's the Jewish New Year. Yeah. So that's when Pam thought, about writing a letter to the Jim Baker show and see where it went from there.
And you know, I did want to mention to the folks too that one significant thing about this black and white cow that was born in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, is named either Big Ben or, but Benjamin. It comes from the name the Pittsburgh Steeler, but it comes from Benjamin. And I wanted the folks to know that's very, very significant to our story, because the name Benjamin in Hebrew means the son of my right hand. Now, you mentioned your calf is named Shemitah, and of course, Shemitah in Hebrew is the release. Talking about a release, it could be a release of prosperity or release of freedom. Just as there's a release, as an example, we have the Sabbath every 7 days, right? A day of rest. And then 7 years in ancient Israel, they were not to plant anything. The 7th year to let the land rest for a whole year. And then every 50 years, of course, they would have a jubilee, right? So there's sort of a connection with that. But your cow's named Shemitah, so the release. So when you look at both cows, one is called the son of my right hand, and the other is called the release. So I think that's important.
Right.
So I think the Lord is trying to show us something there, folks. But what would you like the viewers to take away from our interview today, filming on your ranch?
Okay. For me, I just want people to know that we do serve a God that still is in the business of giving signs and wonders. And He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The verse in the Bible, He is the same. And so He speaks to His people through signs, and sometimes we just don't pay attention. I know I'm guilty of that. But when we got this calf, I just am amazed that, I think there is a verse in the Bible that talks about God speaks through His creation. And this is His creation, and I definitely feel like He is speaking. And so we need to pay attention. And for me, since she's been born since 2014, that's 5 years. Well, I mean, just from what I've seen, political and current events, well, she fulfills the bill of what's happening in our world today. And it's amazing. The 7, I mean, look who we've got for a president now. I mean, it's President Trump, and 7 surround his life. I mean, you talk about that in the Cyrus effect, and how on Inauguration Day, what was it? He was 70 years old.
70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old.
Yeah.
The day he swore in.
And he was president in the year of
5777 in the Hebrew year, yeah.
Yeah, I'm amazed. So 7 on our calf has some meaning, I think, about that.
I think so.
And then our president has united Israel with the United States through putting the embassy there, through naming Jerusalem the capital of Israel. And so that's the part where the red heifer comes in. I mean, this cow could have been a black bull with a 7 on it, but no, it's a red heifer with a 7 on it. So I look at that and I'm thinking, oh my goodness! I said, 7 trumps the president with all the 7s, and now he's united us with Israel, and I think the Lord was speaking through that calf. There's a lot of things there to look at, and I know there's a lot of people that's prophesied President Trump would be president probably way back in 2012, and some, I know one in 2007.
Yes, that's true.
And it's amazing that God is talking to us, and we just need to pay attention. And if anything else from this video, I just hope that people realize that we serve a living God, a God that is real, and He speaks to us, and He wants us to pay attention and to know that He is real, and that we just need to know that He hasn't forsaken us. I mean, we look around and the world looks kind of sad sometimes, but there is such good when you pay attention and see the works of the living God in our lives. So that's basically what I want people to know, and to not just want to give up hope at times when you can't, you wonder where is God? But God is, let me tell you, He is alive and well, and He is in control. So that's what I want people to know.
Michael,
Thank you,
can
Pam.
I add one thing?
Yes, sir.
One important thing I missed. I know God's got His hand on this because His timing. Had we walked in that night after shopping, had we walked in 10 minutes later, we would not ever known anything about a cow with a 7 on its forehead.
No.
So we would not have contacted Jim Baker or any show. We wouldn't have known anything. But God had His way in this, and He made it possible. It's just funny the way He puts things together. I mean, I had to, that bull, we had to drive to Mount Calm, Texas to buy a bull. And the cow that it was born from, we had to drive to Tyler, Texas to get a Jersey cow whose mother was the Shemitah's mother's name's Lovey. And so her mother's name was Lulu. And we drove to Tyler, Texas to get a Jersey cow because we wanted a Jersey cow. And so that's all this stuff put together. It's just hard to imagine how He can put all these pieces together like that, and make it come about. And it's all about timing, and it's His time, So that was a very important, issue that I missed there, but I wanted to be sure and let you know.
Well, thank you, Hap. And last but not least, let me say this, that when your red heifer was born, yes, it was the first day of the Jewish New Year, but it was also the Feast of Trumpets.
Yeah.
So I don't think that was by accident.
We weren't aware of that. We just.
And there again, the Feast of Trumpets, that
Very
kind
significant.
of brings up President Trump again.
It does. It does.
Trump,
It does.
Trump all over the place.
Well, Hap and Pam, I just want to let you know how much we deeply appreciate you inviting us to your home and welcoming us here today.
Yeah.
I hope some of the people that are watching this, they will realize that God is showing something to America. I think that there is a sign here. And I know as we progress in our film later, once we produce our film and it's out there, people have an idea just what America, that they have an opportunity to do the right thing and to seek the Lord. And we want our country to do well, don't we? We want
That's
our
right.
country to be blessed. And again, thank you for having us here today.
Oh, we
It's been
enjoy
a pleasure to get this out.
In September 2014, 2 cows were born within 5 days of each other that had a number 7 in their forehead. The first cow, born on September 20th, 2014, was born on a farm in Pennsylvania. It was a black and white cow. The number 7 in its forehead was almost as large as its forehead. It was first named Baby Ben after one of the quarterbacks in the Pittsburgh Steelers. The story when it first came out was with the Reuters news agency. The story was on a secular level, putting the thought out there, maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers might win the next Super Bowl game since the cow had the lucky number 7 on its forehead. Several other news agencies followed up on the story, but none of it was spiritual in nature. 5 days after Baby Ben was born, a red heifer was born on a farm in Gatesville, Texas. It too had a number 7 on its forehead. Its birthday was on September 25th, 2014. Of course, this was a red heifer, red from head to toe, actually. We wanted you to know this isn't normal to have a cow with a number 7 on its forehead. Some experts have said they have never even seen this before. Some days later, the Jim Baker Show up in Branson, Missouri, talked about this first black and white cow. They were not aware of the red heifer being born up to that point. Messianic Rabbi Jonathan Cahn was a guest on the Baker Show, and Jim Baker asked Cahn what he thought about this. When that show aired on television, Hap and Pam Ray down in Texas just happened to catch a bit of that discussion on TV, and it immediately dawned on them, hey, we just had a red heifer recently born with a number 7 on its forehead too. So they were able to call up Jim Baker in Missouri and share that story. So to Pastor Baker's credit, he sent investigative reporter Zach True with a film crew down to Gatesville, Texas to interview the Ray couple and meet the red heifer out on the pasture. I've seen all the footage of that interview, and I must admit, Zach Drew did a great job interviewing, and it appeared he was asking all the right questions. Sometime later, Hap and Pam were invited to be guests on the Baker Show, and Rabbi Jonathan Cahn was being interviewed that day on the show. Now that two cows were out there, born 5 days from each other, Baker once again asked Rabbi Cahn what he thought about this whole thing. Rabbi Cahn felt there could be a connection to both of the dreams the Pharaoh had in Genesis chapter 41 in the Joseph in Egypt story. There were a total of 14 cows in the dream. Within the context of the dream, 7 cows represented 7 good years of harvest, and the other cows represented 7 years of horrific famine. However, the bottom line of Rabbi Kahn's assessment was he thought it tied into an economic collapse here in America the following year in 2015. Well, for the record, there is a YouTube video out there about that interview. But for the record, I had a different take on the meaning of these two cows and what it meant. In fact, in early October 2014, I sent an email to a small group of individuals here in the United States expressing my theory, and my theory has actually never changed. Now, to be fair, I believe Rabbi Jonathan Cahn is a very strong prophetic voice. God has used him in a very mighty way, and I do consider him to be a true watchman on the wall. My difference of opinion about these two cows is only related to this story. I think Rabbi Cahn had a good point about a connection to the Pharaoh's two dreams. Deuteronomy chapter 19 verse 15 tells us that before a prophetic prophecy is established, it must be proclaimed by 2 or 3 witnesses. Perhaps we're the second witness. And even though the rabbi wasn't correct about an economic collapse in 2015, the following year, I would like the opportunity to share what I believe could be a sign from God to America in the coming days ahead. During the last 43 years, I've been sharing prophecy related to biblical stories. I've always been an avid observer to things that take place on key days associated with the Hebrew calendar. As I convey this story, I will do my very best to keep it as simple as possible. When the second calf or red heifer was born with the number 7 in its forehead, that was the 25th of September 2014. It was actually Tishri 1 or Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year day, which is similar to your January 1st. I don't want you to focus on the red heifer as a perfect red heifer like the one being sought after in Israel. It's not a perfect red heifer as to color today. In fact, it's lost some of its color over the years. But it's the number 7 on its forehead, its red color, and the Jewish feast day it was born on that is the main focus here. When you analyze the Pharaoh's dream in Genesis chapter 41, there are 7 healthy cows that come up out of the river, followed by 7 lean cows. Before the Pharaoh woke up from his dream, the 7 lean cows ate the 7 healthy cows, but they didn't look any healthier. Pharaoh's other dream was 7 ears of healthy corn or wheat versus 7 ears of withered grain. Joseph tells the Pharaoh that both of these dreams actually has the same meaning. There will be 7 years of plentiful crops followed by 7 years of horrific famine. By the way, reading the King James text, their future famine was over the whole face of the earth. It was not a regional thing. And you will find that in Genesis chapter 41, verse 56. In no way am I saying, "Thus saith the Lord," or "God has told me," but I do believe there could be a huge story here that has been totally overlooked. So here is my theory. When the second cow or red heifer was born in Gatesville, Texas, that just happened to be on the first day of the Jewish New Year calendar, if you will, which corresponds to September or October on your calendar. That day was the 25th of September 2014. We believe it's very possible this could be a sign from God to America. If that's true, it means the 7 good years began on the 25th of September 2014. Well, right now, it's August 2019 today. That means we're almost 5 years into the 7 good years. And the end of the 7 good years would end on September 6th, 2021, which is about 2 years away from now. Then the 7 lean years would begin on the 7th of September 2021 and would go to September 2028. Being that most of you are non-Jews, I won't confuse you with Hebrew months in year numbers, but there could be a huge story here. So this red heifer has nothing to do with Israel. So it is a sign, though, I believe, to America. But if the 7 lean years are September to 2021 to September 2028, what could that mean for our country? It could mean a major reset in our standard of living, maybe a collapse of the U.S. dollar and or hard times coming to our economy. This could also portray deep cuts in Medicare or Social Security. There was also the possibility during those future lean years the U.S. dollar could be replaced by something called SDRs, or special drawing rights. You may want to take note of that. As time goes on, it's very probable digital money will be more widely accepted here in America. In fact, digital money could be coming to a country near you and very soon. If hard times does come our way between 2021 to 2028, how will that affect you and your family? You know, it's no surprise America has lost its first love, and that always starts with God. On a personal level, if you put God first in your life, other things will be added unto you. Even if there's not a literal famine coming to America, at a minimum, there will continue to be a famine of the Word of God. My personal opinion is America will continue to experience remedial judgments in the form of earthquakes, hurricanes, pestilences, tornadoes, crop failures, flooding, and drought. And how America treats Israel is also a major factor. By the way, the first cow born with the number 7 in its forehead was black and white. Being in the black has always had a positive picture, fiscally speaking. The second cow was red, denoting being in the red, which always, of course, shows debt. The black and white cow, named Benjamin, its name in Hebrew means the son of my right hand. Does that connect to God? And the red heifer's name is actually Shemitah, which in Hebrew means the release. It also has a connection to the Sabbath of the land. Could that mean a reset concerning our economy or food supply up ahead? Whether you believe this story or not, time will tell if it is true. I knew there was something important enough here to pursue this story, important enough to locate this couple in Gatesville and go down and interview them. After meeting them, it became clear they were a very righteous family before the Lord. I don't think it was by accident God had chosen this strong Christian couple to be the owners of this very special cow. It's important to keep in mind the number 7 in the Bible has a connection to God's perfection and completeness. No matter what direction America decides to go in the foreseeable future, it's always the folks that reject God that have cause to fear not the believers. God will always be on the throne, and prayer can change things. Well, thank you for taking the time to hear this story. In our next segment, part 2, we will discuss what the Bible says about the red heifer. So don't touch that dial. As you know, about 3,500 years ago, Moses received the law from God on Mount Sinai. Of course, the book of Numbers is one of the 5 books that Moses received. And it's in Numbers chapter 19 we see God's instruction on how to identify this heifer. It had to be totally red, even down to the hooves. In the Bible, it actually doesn't give an age it had to be sacrificed, such as 2 or 3 years old. But it was clear the high priest of Israel was the one tasked to oversee this. Numbers 19, verses 1 through 10, gives instructions how the red heifer was to be prepared. And this heifer could not have been used doing any type of labor. Even someone leaning on it technically would be that of labor. The sacrifice was to take place outside of the camp. After the high priest would slay the animal, it was placed on an altar. There had to be cedar wood, hyssop, and a scarlet cord or scarlet thread placed in the fire with the animal as it was burned. This should throw up a flag with you. There must be some meaning behind this whole procedure. Well, actually, yes, there is. It's important to maintain this heifer is a female animal. All other animal sacrifices in the Bible are actually male sacrifices. Well, you're welcome to get out your Bible and follow along. If you can always stop the DVD if you wish and go back if you want to see something to take notes over that you missed. As always, I'll be using the King James Version of the Bible as a reference to ensure exactness. You do have to admit this strange and unusual story is only found in one chapter in the Bible, but its meaning, nevertheless, is extremely important. In Numbers chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, it covers the type heifer needed, the ingredients that was to be placed into the fire, and the importance of a pure water source mixed with the red heifer's ashes. The purpose of all this was to purify sin. Verses 11 through 16 clarifies what makes a person, ceremoniously speaking, unclean. This all began with Moses when he received the law from God. That was about 1,500 years before Jesus was even born. Being sanctified through the ashes of the red heifer mixed with a pure water source was intended to sanctify the high priest of Israel, the Kohanim or priests of Israel, and at times the congregation of regular Jews if they became spiritually unclean. Once the Messiah came and fulfilled this requirement, in other words, becoming a type of the red heifer, Jews and Gentiles would no longer need to be cleaned by this red heifer ceremony because both Jew and Gentile could be sanctified through Christ's sacrifice. But believing in Christ and putting faith in his fulfillment of the red heifer purpose would have to be accepted. This is because once Jesus died on the cross, the red heifer purpose was actually null and void. Verses 11 through 22 deals with how to use the water of purification and the ashes. So let's talk about this subject in an easy way to understand it. As we see in Numbers chapter 19, verse 2 through 6, a perfect red heifer had to be found. It is not only pure red in its skin, but even their hooves had to be totally red. It couldn't have any spots or blemishes. In verse 3, it tells us no yoke could have ever been connected to this animal. In other words, it could have never been utilized in any capacity of work. The heifer had to be a female. As I mentioned earlier, all the other type animal sacrifices in the Bible were actually male sacrifices. It was expected that the high priest of Israel would be the person who would sacrifice this animal or have jurisdiction over it. Verse 3 tells us the red heifer sacrifice had to take place outside of the camp. That's very important to note, by the way. At the time of this originating, or I should say at the time the law came about originally, Eleazar was actually the high priest of Israel. Not only was he, the high priest, required to be face-to-face in slaying this animal, but was to take the blood from the heifer with his finger and sprinkle her blood directly before the tabernacle of the congregation 7 times. After the sprinkling of the blood 7 times, a fire would be set up where the heifer would be cast into the fire. Her skin and flesh and her blood, along with her dung, would be burned. During the fire process, cedar wood, hyssop, and a scarlet cord or thread were required to be ingredients into this fire. Once the ashes of the red heifer are mixed with a pure water source of free-running water like a spring or river, it would then be placed in a bath or mikvah where the unclean person could bathe in it. It could also be sprinkled on someone. In Numbers chapter 19, verse 12 through 19 tells us that the unclean person is to do this on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Of course, over time, over the course of many years, rabbis in Israel added additional requirements as to the red heifer ceremony. They are of the belief, too, that everyone in the world would be considered unclean, ceremoniously speaking. One of the greatest Jewish sages who ever lived, his name was Rambam. He lived from 1135 to 1204 AD. He was of the belief that when the 10th red heifer comes about, it will be during the time of the coming of Messiah. In the ancient Talmud, in Mishnah Para, chapter 3, verse 4, it mentions there were 9 heifers total in Israel's past history from Moses to 70 AD. That's very important to make a note of, by the way. So today the rabbis would say anyone who has ever had contact with a dead body, walked through a cemetery, even visited a funeral home, or been in a hospital where someone has died would be ceremoniously unclean. So you cannot enter a holy place such as the Temple Mount area because of that status. In fact, if you were to walk up to the Temple Mount today, there are actually placards posted reminding folks it isn't proper to be on the Temple Mount because of their status. By the way, they have several of these placards posted, and we have a few pictures of them as well. Not all rabbis, however, would agree, and there have been a few rabbis, in particular some from the Temple Institute, who have made a pilgrimage up to the Temple Mount. The Muslim Wafd who control the Temple Mount, they have spies and Muslim police roaming around ensuring no Jews are found praying there. Christians, too, are not allowed to pray there on the Temple Mount platform. Anyone doing so could be taken into custody. And up to now, the Israeli government has gone along with that since they do not want trouble with the Muslims. And by the way, I personally have been on top of that Temple Mount platform. Yes, it doesn't seem fair that Jews are so discriminated against by the Muslims as well as the Israeli government, but down at the Western Wall, which is under Israeli control, men and women cannot worship there together, and women are not allowed to pray there, even in the women's area. There's a number of things actually that the Westerners are not aware of in Israel that go on. But when Messiah comes, that will all change. So, if there hasn't been a red heifer since the year 70 AD, why all this talk now about a red heifer? So a little modern history, I believe, is in order. In 1989, a Gentile rancher by the name of Clyde Lott from Canton, Mississippi, contacted some rabbis in Israel and claimed a red heifer is possible. Over time, he claimed he actually had one. In November 1994, Rabbi Chaim Richman from the Temple Institute in Jerusalem flew to Canton, Mississippi to see for himself if this was actually true. By the way, he was astounded what he saw. There was talk about reestablishing a Canaan Land Restoration of Israel company to export red Angus cows, but that later was decided they would not go that route, and that in fact did not happen. Today, live cows are not allowed into Israel, to be shipped into Israel, so frozen embryos are shipped to Israel where they're inseminated into red Angus cows. But in the meantime, the red heifers were being cloned in Israel. But then on March 16th, 1997, the first red heifer was born in Israel on a religious kibbutz called Kfar Hasidim, outside of Heifer, Israel. The rabbis were very excited about this because this was the first red heifer that was born that appeared to be perfect since 70 AD. Remember earlier I told you the rabbis would make up more requirements over time that are not in the Bible. Melody was actually the name of this first red heifer that was born in Israel. As the rabbis began to make more rules, it was determined the perfect red heifer had to be born in Israel, and a sacrificial age was in fact established. This age would start to be counted at the conception, not the birth of the cow. But how long does it take a red heifer to be born after conception? Well, the answer to that is 283 days, give or take 4. That's about 9.4 months if divided by a 30-day prophetic month. Notice it's not far off from a human. Perhaps that was by design by God. Unfortunately for Melody, the first red heifer, prior to her sacrificial age, she developed some white hairs on her back end, and she was now disqualified. Years later, in the spring of 2010, the Temple Institute in Israel went on national TV and radio stating that they had more than one perfect red heifer, but that too ended up with those heifers being disqualified at a later date. Well, folks, I have a news flash. On the 28th of August 2018, a female red heifer was born that was officially certified by a board of rabbis as being pure without blemish. In the meantime, it's always possible they could develop some hairs that aren't red. If there's more than 2 hairs that are not perfectly red, that renders the calf disqualified. Anyway, up to the making of this film, this red heifer is still in the running, I'm happy to say. So the reason for all the excitement now is this really could be the first red heifer in nearly 2,000 years. If it ends up being true and the cow is properly sacrificed, this will, in my opinion, be the 10th red heifer in all of Israel's history. Now, you know why these rabbis are so excited. It almost appears like many positive things have recently developed, such as the Trump administration moving the embassy to Jerusalem, also talk of a Middle East peace plan possibly happening, and the Jews are wondering if a decision to build the third temple is on the horizon. Many evangelicals are keenly aware a future Antichrist will someday declare himself as God in a third rebuilt temple. But the believing Jews who do not believe in Jesus are of the mindset that that is their God, that they have a God-given right to in fact build this future temple. Obviously, someone has to build it, for it has to be here when the go-ahead is given, and of course before the Antichrist declares himself as God there as well. Ever since I actually first got my first personal computer in the year 2000, I'm always keeping my finger on the pulse about this particular subject. So much so, I visited Rabbi Chaim Richman at his private office in Jerusalem in September 2007, and we spent about an hour discussing the history of this subject as well as other recent developments. There's no question about it. Rabbi Chaim Richman is the father of the Red Heifer program. He is also the one that put this all on the map, if you will, and as well as being the international director of the Temple Institute, he is also a member, in fact, of the Sanhedrin, and he is also a spokesperson for the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Richman is also one of the most important persons in Israel concerning the rebuilding of the future Third Temple. At least up to this point, the Israeli government isn't in favor of a Third Temple being built in fear of causing World War III with the Arabs. However, all of this, politically speaking, could change if some peace deal was agreed to by the Jews and the Arabs. But even if the rabbis were given the green light to build a third temple, a high priest and priesthood cannot be sanctified unless they have contact with water sprinkled with the ashes of a red heifer. In other words, no red heifer ashes, no workable temple. And that, my friend, is a fact. My personal opinion is I do believe Israel will come up with the ashes of a red heifer in this generation. The building of a third temple will be agreed upon between Israel and the Palestinians at some point in the future. A rapture, tribulation, and Antichrist will come about this generation along with the coming of the Lord, I personally believe. Well, folks, we're on the home stretch. In our next segment, part 3, we will be discussing how Jesus Christ plays a part in all of this. So stay tuned. As we transition into part 3, I'm saving the very best for last. In this segment, we will clearly show you how Jesus Christ fulfilled every aspect of the Old Testament red heifer sacrifice. One of the most unusual types and shadows in the Bible is how Jesus paints this imagery of the suffering Messiah and through his death purifies the unclean. All other sacrifices were male animal sacrifices, but the red heifer was a female sacrifice. Jesus fulfilled this concept that through his death he redeemed a bride. And you will find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2. Just as the red heifer was offered outside of the camp in Numbers chapter 19, verse 3, Jesus was sacrificed outside the gate of the city, Hebrews 13:12. And just as the heifer had to be without blemish, Numbers 19:2, Jesus was also pure without spot or blemish, and you'll find that in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. Another comparison was the priests had to observe the sacrifice while someone else killed the heifer, Numbers 19, verse 3. In the case of Jesus, the priest looked on as others crucified him, Matthew 27, verse 41. Under the law, the red heifer had to be totally burned, Numbers 19, verse 5. In Hebrews 10 and 10, we see how Jesus, once and for all, became a total sacrifice that all can be sanctified through his death on the cross. During the sacrifice of the heifer on the altar, a scarlet cord had to be placed into the fire, Numbers 19, verse 6. In Matthew 27, verse 28, a scarlet robe was placed on Jesus Christ. Notice the color is that of blood. We find in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11, the life of the flesh is in the blood, and it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. In Numbers 19, verse 6, cedar wood had to be required to be placed into the fire. The cedar wood is an incorruptible type wood that is impervious to insect infestation. The cross of Jesus also represents the incorruptible personality of Jesus the Messiah, who knew no sin and was never corrupted with the world in any way. Under the law, hyssop had to be placed into the sacrificial fire of the red heifer, Numbers chapter 19, verse 6. While Jesus was on the cross, hyssop was placed up to Jesus' lips. You'll find that in John chapter 19, verse 29. Just as the ashes of the red heifer were essential for the water of separation in Numbers 19, verse 9, 1 John chapter 1, verse 7 tells us that it demonstrates that Jesus' blood can separate us from all of our sins. In Numbers chapter 19, verse 4, the high priest of Israel was to sprinkle the blood of the red heifer 7 times before the tabernacle of the congregation. Well, folks, there was actually 7 times Jesus' blood was shed in association with his crucifixion. Number 1, when he was scourged. That's in Mark chapter 15, verse 15. Number 2, when a crown of thorns was placed on his head. Matthew chapter 27, verse 29. Number 3, on his left hand when he was crucified. That's in John chapter 20, verse 27. Number 4, on his right hand when he was crucified. Numbers chapter 20, verse 27. Number 5, on his left foot on the cross. Luke chapter 24, verse 39 and 40. And, of course, number 6, on his right foot on the cross, Luke chapter 24, verse 39 and 40. And number 7, as the soldier pierced Jesus Christ's side, blood and water issued out. You'll find that in John chapter 19, verse 34. As you can see, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago is purely patterned after the red heifer sacrifice. And remember, that was given in the law 1,500 years approximately before Jesus was even born. While the Orthodox in Israel are on the cutting edge of seeing a perfect red heifer sacrifice, the question must be asked, do Christians need a red heifer sacrifice to be sanctified? That question is actually answered in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 13 and 14. For it says, "For if the blood of bulls and of goats and the ashes of an heifer sprinkling the unclean, sanctified to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God?" If you recall, it was told us in the law in Numbers chapter 19, verse 12, he shall purify himself on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day he shall be clean. Keeping in mind Matthew chapter 16, verse 21 tells us Jesus was killed and would be raised from the dead on the, quote, 3rd day. In other words, Jesus became purified on the 3rd day after taking on the sins of the world. But what about Numbers chapter 19, verse 12, where it says, "And on the 7th day he shall be clean"? Well, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 tells us, "A day unto the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years unto a day." It's about 6,000 years right now from the time of Adam and Eve. In other words, the 6th day is just about up. The 1,000-year millennial kingdom is the equivalent of the 7th day, and all of us in Christ will be clean through him. Do you realize the significance of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago fulfilling all these things? Now that you know that, Jesus the Messiah has his DNA fingerprint all over Numbers chapter 19. Are your eyes open? Do you see the reality of the red heifer story? Well, we hope you've been blessed with this last day revelation. It's been my pleasure serving you and reporting to you. I'm Michael Smith. May the Lord richly bless you, and shalom, shalom.